Here's Guy Wayman, Ben Brunson, and Frank Vernuccio, Inside the News.
Welcome back to the next segment of Inside the News. We want to thank you for listening on our affiliates, the radio stations across the country, and also on YouTube, our YouTube channel, WBV Inside the News. All right, healthcare is big, and this is normally our international segment, but we have to continue. The Congress is voting even as we are speaking this afternoon here. And, Ben, this is really a procedural vote to continue on, but they have to put their money where the mouth is right now.
Well, this is an important vote, and as we record, we don't know the outcome. But we know that Senator McCain is returning to Capitol Hill to cast a vote. I suspect that this vote will succeed. It is a motion to proceed. It will allow the bill, the health care bill, to come out of committee and go to the floor of the Senate, where amendments can be openly offered by multiple senators from both parties and voted upon a piece, and a final bill can be crafted for a up or down vote in the Senate. So this is an important step forward, I think, in whether or not there is going to be a repeal and replace bill that gets through the Senate. As I said, I do expect that this bill will succeed. I hope it does, because I think it's healthy for this next step to take this bill to the floor and for some open debate to take place. I always welcome debate on Capitol Hill. I think it's good for the country for different opinions to be heard. So let's hope that this goes forward. If it dies, I think the Republicans have to move on to tax reform, and they cannot let their agenda be held hostage by health care reform.
Okay, Frank, the president has chided the senators of the GOP to say, get off your butts and do your job. And quite frankly, I like that kind of talk. And I think the United States of America, the public out there, likes that kind of talk.
Well, of course, one of the things that we have to throw into this discussion when we get past all the procedural issues and all the political stuff is the fact that Obamacare is collapsing on itself. There are states where you have just absolutely no choice at all. There's one provider under Obamacare. We keep talking about, in the media as a whole, what happens if Obamacare is replaced. We're not talking about what happens if Obamacare is not replaced, because the whole concept is indeed crashing in on itself. Let's be very blunt. The only success, if you want to call it that Obamacare has had is in dramatically swelling the Medicaid rolls. Well, we could have done that without all the red tape and bureaucracy of Obamacare. It is a failed concept that is collapsing. The president is right to try to emphasize something has to be done and done quickly, because for far too many Americans, this is turning into a real disaster, a disaster where they have no choice of providers, a disaster where the coverage that they are paying so dearly for and spending so much more for each year is turning out to be an illusion, where you spend a significant amount of money on an Obamacare metal policy, and then you find out that the deductibles are so high, it's essentially illusory coverage. Something has to be done, and something has to be done quickly. Once again, though, we're not talking about the core issue in America. We're talking about the surrounding political discussions. Obamacare is collapsing. Something needs to be done, and done quickly.
Had Hillary Clinton been elected, she was going to tackle the same thing at this point in her presidency, and the Democrats would have been fully on board. We've got to fix Obamacare, and there wouldn't have been anything. They would have been at the same spot here, Ben, and yet because it was Trump being elected as president, being in this position, they're opposing it, but every Democrat up there in the Hill, they know this thing is dying.
Well, they do. There is differences, of course. If Hillary had won, her ideological bent would have been towards a single-payer system. And if nothing is done, in effect, we are moving towards that, because increasingly, as private insurers pull out of these markets, the healthcare exchanges, and it's happening to a very large extent very rapidly in rural areas where a lot of areas no longer have a private insurer available. The only option left is Medicaid, the state's version of Medicaid. And so you have a lot of people migrating onto Medicaid, which is, in essence, a single-payer system. So what is interesting to me, if Hillary had won, I'm not entirely sure that what ultimately would have passed through this Congress will look different than what may pass anyway under Donald Trump. So there would have been an attempt to fix it. A lot of what I'm hearing out of the Senate amounts to just a tweaking around the edges of Obamacare as opposed to any type of radical change. That is the concern that a lot of conservatives like Rand Paul have been stating, that there are not free market alternatives that are being embedded into the legislation that can actually create competition and drive down costs in this industry as a result. We all know what happens. The reality has been proven a million times over everywhere on planet Earth. If you have competition, costs are driven down. If you have government-mandated monopolies or monopsonies or restrictions and restraint on trade, costs are driven up. The cost to consumers are driven up. That is a fact of life. It is true everywhere. And if we don't bring free market principles to bear in our healthcare system, by increasing competition, by getting rid of interstate prohibitions, by having some sensible tort reform, by getting rid of the restraints on trade that a lot of cities and municipalities put on the expansion of health facilities around the country, if we don't do that, we're going to see the cost of healthcare continue to rise regardless of what else is done in Washington.
Before we leave healthcare, Frank, did you have a final thought on it?
I think Ben said it pretty well. Again, the bottom line has got to be this is a system in collapse. It's got to be reformed. It's got to be repealed and replaced. But we have to do it in an intelligent manner. We've got to take the politics out of it. We've got to remember this is about the people, not about the politicians.
Okay, Frank, moving into the international area here. There is a military buildup by China along the North Korean border, and that tells us something right there, doesn't it?
Well, it certainly does. The fact is this is coming to a head, but the terrible part about all this is that it convinces me even more that the fact that China has absolutely no intention of helping the West, of helping the United States rein in North Korea's nuclear program. They look as though they're preparing to deal with the aftermath of an American attempt to knock out the nuclear program of North Korea, rather than doing what they could, quite frankly, do without too much trouble at all, which is simply tell the North Koreans that we will no longer trade with you, we will destroy your economy by simply shutting off our border if you continue on your menacing nuclear program. Clearly, the message from China is that we have no intention of helping the West. And indeed, I never expected that they would. The fact of the matter is, China continues to gain from North Korea's nuclear program in two separate ways. Number one, it diverts attention from China's own increasingly aggressive military actions and extraordinary military buildup. And number two, it provides the Chinese, and I know how controversial this is to a lot of people, but it provides the Chinese with a military arm to destroy American, Japanese, or South Korean bases without having Chinese fingerprints on it. The fact is, China hates the fact that the United States, Japan, and South Korea have formidable militaries, and I think they're doing everything possible to try to knock that down, but without getting their fingerprints on it. That's what they benefit, that's the gain they have from the North Korean nuclear program, and that's what they don't want to lose.
These are some of the real core issues that we should be talking about right now, because these are affecting here in the United States. Ben, your take on the China military buildup?
Well, I agree with most of what Frank said, if not all of it. The fact is that what China is doing is preparing for one of two outcomes by increasing their forces along the North Korean border, and it's a pretty substantial increase. And latest reports are that the Chinese are digging in and fortifying the border. So they're preparing for either a regime collapse, and in that scenario, they want to stop migration, uncontrolled migration from North Korea into China, which they've always feared. The other thing they are clearly preparing for is if the U.S. invades North Korea, they will almost certainly advance into North Korea and create some type of buffer zone. How big that buffer zone would be, how deep into North Korea they would go would be to be determined, of course, but they would want a buffer zone so that U.S. and South Korean forces are not right on their border. So they are prepared for either eventuality. And as Frank says, it is a statement to a very large extent that they are not going to do what they could do to bring about a peaceful resolution to this. They could collapse what exists of North Korea's economy. They could, I'm sure they have lots of inroads into North Korean military leadership. They could make it clear that they want the dictator overthrown and the program ended if they wanted to. They have not shown any willingness to do that to date, and so I don't expect any change in their behavior.
All right, across the globe, Venezuela, Frank, total unrest, and we're talking about socialism gone bad.
As if socialism has ever done anything but go bad.
Yeah.
It's remarkable that in nations as diverse as the old Soviet Union and current Venezuela, socialism has collapsed. It simply is an unworkable concept. I really hope that everyone who voted for Bernie Sanders in the last election and who continues to talk about socialism as though it's some kind of viable option takes a good hard look at what's going on in Venezuela. Let's not forget that Venezuela, by all rights, should be a prosperous and wonderful place to live. It's got an extraordinary amount of oil. It has a well-educated and intelligent population, a diverse population. It should, by all rights, be at a really prosperous state. The fact of the matter is, it's not any global market forces that destroyed Venezuela. It was socialism. The very type of socialism that so many people on the hard left in the United States want to adopt right here in our country. It's time they open their eyes.
Ben?
Well, I couldn't agree more. Look, I wish everyone under 30 who thinks Bernie Sanders and socialism is cool, and the vast majority of these people, if you ask them to name when the American Revolution took place, would probably say around 1960. So they have absolutely no knowledge what they're talking about. They have no conception of what free market capitalism is versus socialism, what these ideas are. They'll continue to say, well, Finland or Sweden are socialist countries. They are not. Those are capitalist countries. You can run a business. Large businesses exist in those countries, no different than every large business in the U.S., and they have free market rights and everything else. They just have a broad social safety net. What is going on in Venezuela is a travesty. It puts the lie to all of the left-wing theories about economics that you get taught when you're growing up about how the reason the U.S. is rich is because of all our natural resources. Well, here's a country that has more natural resources than you could shake a stick at, and nothing but poverty and misery as a result of 17 years of socialist policies run amok. And it is just a horrible thing to watch, the misery going on in that country. I wish everyone under 30 who loves Bernie Sanders would fly to Caracas and hang out for a couple of days. And if you avoid being kidnapped while you're there, which is highly unlikely, but if you avoid it, you'll understand exactly how horrible socialist ideology is.
All right, a couple minutes left in this segment. Okay, Frank, the Russian incursions along the Ukraine. We have not heard much about the Ukraine, but Russia is still not giving up. After Crimea, they still want that country.
Well, that's absolutely right, but it's part of the larger picture. The fact is, Vladimir Putin has made no secret of the fact that he wants to get the Soviet Union back together again. He has said that the greatest tragedy of the 20th century was not the concentration camps of Auschwitz or Buchenwald, was not the millions of people who died under Mao Zedong. The greatest tragedy, according to Vladimir Putin, of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. A government that failed to provide for its own people, a government that enslaved half of Europe, a government that actually intentionally killed millions of its own citizens, the kulaks, through starvation, a nation-state that developed a secret police that terrorized an entire nation, an entire empire, in fact. That's what Vladimir Putin sees as the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. What he's doing in the Ukraine is absolutely part of a piece of his plan to put the Soviet Union back together. unless you think that is something out of a science fiction movie or a Tom Clancy novel, just ask the people of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania the constant pressure they are under, not to mention, of course, Poland, to reincorporate into some kind of new Soviet empire. We need to look at this with a clear eye. We need to understand what's going on here. We need to realize how dangerous this is for the future of this planet.
And we're going to give Ben a chance to talk about that in our next segment, but we've got to take a commercial break here. You're listening to Wayman Brunson and Venuccio Inside the News. You can find Frank at usagovpolicy.com. You can find Ben at benbrunson.com and amazon.com. And we invite you to listen to our YouTube channel, WBV Inside the News. We'll be back.
You're listening to Wayman Brunson and Venuccio Inside the News.